Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leanna Gamber-Thompson, Digital Project and Operations Manager here at EdSurge. EdSurge is a news and information resource helping bring you the best in education technology through our news stories, research programs, and community activities, which include events like this webinar. And at the end of last year, EdSurge joined ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education. ISTE is a nonprofit organization that serves educators who are interested in the use of technology in education. For today's webinar, we've lined up a really great group of educators and learning experts for a conversation on how to support successful STEM learning online. So just a quick note before we begin, this webinar will be recorded. We will make that recording available to you via email sometime within the next week, along with some resources. So be watching your inbox after the live event to receive that recording. I want to start by thanking Digital Ed, who support made this webinar possible. Digital Ed offers online education solutions designed especially for STEM courses. We're going to be talking a little bit about that today. And their mission is to transform online education and empower educators across the world to make learning better for everyone. So you can ask questions throughout this webinar using the Q&A feature. So what I want to do is feel free to use the chat function to say hello, where you're coming from, and share your own resources. But if you have a question for the panelists, please do put it in the Q&A feature so that they'll be able to see it and I'll be able to see it when we get to the panelist questions toward the end of the call. So speaking of those panelists, let's introduce them. They're a really impressive group. Ariel Cintron Arias is Associate Professor from the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at East Tennessee State University. Connie Johnson is Chief Academic Officer and Provost at Colorado Technical University. And Louise Krompatek is the Vice President of Enterprise Services at Digital Ed. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited that you're here. So those of you who watch these webinars regularly, sometimes we have some additional slides for you, but we've had so much interest in this conversation that I thought we would actually just launch right into the discussion today because there's a lot to cover. As you all know, in higher ed, most students were online and doing all instruction online in the course of about 2 weeks, starting in March. And that was about 20 million students who very abruptly moved all learning online. So we'll be talking a little bit about that shift to online learning and sort of the pain points that arose from that situation. But we're also going to be doing some forward-looking conversation and thinking about more sustained efforts around online and hybrid learning that colleges and universities are considering for both the fall and beyond. So again, feel free to ask panelists questions. Feel free to weigh in, share your own resources, and say hello in the chat, but use the Q&A feature so that official questions will be visible to the panelists. We won't be able to get to all your questions, but we will try our hardest to answer some of them in the last half of the webinar. Okay, so that's my intro. I've finished my whole spiel. Let's get straight into the conversation. Connie, I want to start with you. You have a great deal of experience supporting online learning, both in this situation, but previously as well, and also in implementing digital tools for adaptive learning. So I would ask you, what piece of advice would you offer colleges and universities, particularly who are moving STEM learning online or exploring hybrid learning models right now?
Thank you, Leanna, and so good to see everybody. I'm looking over at the chat and see we're out of the country, in the US, all over the place, and it's just great to be here. I'll say really 2 words: faculty support. And I say that because you can have the best technology, you can have the slickest tool, but if faculty are not engaged with that tool in the classroom with students, it won't work. And a couple of points that we've actually really adhered to is that I'm really proud that we've rolled out adaptive learning at scale with faculty. We have 500 faculty using adaptive learning tools, and some of them are in STEM content, but we did this through providing training for faculty, support for faculty, not getting frustrated when faculty were struggling, because sometimes it's easy, you know, if you work in technology and you're going through training for the fourth time, sometimes you can get frustrated. But we said, no, we're going to be compassionate, and particularly in switching to remote learning at our campuses for COVID. And I'll say about STEM, what we've learned is that practice of STEM content is very important. Faculty practicing, going through problems, going through examples, if it's computer science, going through programming, if you're in math, practice, practice, practice. What we've seen is that when faculty engage in repetition with the content, and we're supporting faculty to do that, then we see higher levels of engagement in STEM courses.
Super helpful. Thank you, Connie. All right, Ariel, I want to turn to you. You were put in a position where you had to sort of transfer all of your teaching online very quickly. You know, as a faculty who's had to move their work online, what's one piece of advice that you would give to other STEM faculty who are in this situation?
We had 10 days. We had for better or worse, we had the spring break in between, the notification, and when we launched live to transition online. And I would say, maybe I would say a couple of things about the face-to-face teaching. And I think that one feature that comes to, at least my personal experience, is that when I only did instruction face-to-face, I always exploited, always enjoyed the spontaneous, I always improvise, you know, for better or worse. And I always exploited that feature, that I had that freedom of improvisation, and I could give, especially in the upper level courses, and I could change the plan at any given time of my choice. I wouldn't remove the spontaneity, you know, the spontaneous improvisation part, because it's something that has value when you have instruction and the interactions between instructor and students and among students. I think that's very valuable. But when you are going on distance education online, in the spectrum of online, there is synchronous and there is also asynchronous. You really have to go with a mindset where there is room for improvisation, but most of it, you have a very concrete plan. And you're trying to minimize the burden for your students and for yourself as an instructor on the go. So my advice would be, you know, try to have these lesson plans, these schedules, these calendars, very detailed in advance, especially to make the guidelines very clear to the students up front. Sometimes we need to get into a mode of like smaller segments, tasks. What's the outcome? What's the deliverable? You know, within a week, within a day. I have colleagues that are online instructors that they like to give some kind of debriefing at the beginning of the week. I have other colleagues that they do it daily. Every day they have a little message. So based on my own experience, you know, I would, before being an online instructor, I would send these long email messages, you know, and you need to really put yourself on the other side of being a student as well. And if you really want your message to come through, segment it, make it into smaller digestible pieces. The idea of daily debriefs could be very effective, because every day you just have a little thing, you know, 3 bullet points. This is what you have to do for today, or something like that. So clear guidelines, clear expectations, deliverables, dates, use of learning management systems are very handy, with dynamic calendars, you know, that you can also synchronize with due items, and definitely with meetings if you have live meetings. So that there's definitely a lot more, you know, but I think that for students, we tried to, I also gave a little speech to my students, during the spring about this needs to be a time of making this as an opportunity we need to get a little better with transferable skills, with using some of this technology for communication means, and for things that we were not using the technology like this for that purpose before. So I think that that's what we have to keep in mind. I mean, COVID-19 is was not finished, it's not done yet, and we don't know about a second or third wave. And yeah, that would be my advice.
That's great. That's great advice. And I love that tip of breaking communication into small chunks, having a daily check-in. Not only does that reduce the amount of information that students have to digest, but it's an acknowledgement. It humanizes the online learning experience, right? And acknowledges the fact that they're, who knows what they're dealing with at home as well. So I love that tip. I think it's a great one. Louise, I want to turn it over to you. You also have lots of experience in the classroom teaching STEM courses, and then more recently at Digital Ed, working with the Mobius platform. So what's a piece of advice that you would give to educators who want to set themselves up for success in STEM learning, whether that's, in terms of the content or pedagogy or the tech, or just being successful with the tech?
Yeah, thanks. I think probably the content is really key, right? I think, instructors always have limited time to get things online, and even more so, obviously, in the current situation. So looking at their content, figuring out what are the key learning objectives that you have for your course, and focusing on getting that material online. I know, a lot of faculty has a huge amount of material that they provide to their students in a face-to-face class. But if you just try to take all of that content and put it online, it's going to be hard for the instructor to get it all online, but also for the students, they also have a limited amount of time. And because they're not face-to-face, they may not get the same cues as to what's important and what's sort of extra resources or additional material. So it's really important to, as Ariel said, really important to identify, here are the things that you should be focusing on, and really sort of make sure that your online class allows for that, so that the students know, and so that you can focus on the key things as well.
That's great. So similar to what Ariel said about, digestible chunks of content, like overloading them with a huge resource list. There are tons of valuable resources there, but some guidance around like where to start, what is an additional resource, what is key, what is not, seems really helpful. So Ariel, you mentioned synchronous and asynchronous learning. I want to dig into that a little bit more. Connie, I have a question for you about sort of how you as a campus have balanced the synchronous, asynchronous split, and how you are sort of trying to support faculty in making decisions around how much in-person versus asynchronous versus synchronous instruction to do. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing on your campus to support that?
Sure, and I also am glancing in the questions, so I might grab a couple of those if you don't mind too, as we're going through here. I participate in some national organizations with chief academic officers, and the largest problem reported, it was a large survey that was conducted, Titan Partners will be presenting the info, and they've tweeted about it so I can talk about it, said engagement of students is the hardest in asynchronous or synchronous. And so when you're thinking about STEM content, how do you engage the students in an online setting, and how do you engage them in an asynchronous? One thing I want to support really is what Ariel talked about, is chunking of content. We had faculty who initially said, well, I'm going to have a 4-hour lecture. And because that's what they normally did in the classroom, and they took breaks, and students resoundingly said, I can't do this for 4 hours. You have to break that content up for me. And so for the synchronous parts, and we had synchronous, we are changing to asynchronous lectures that students can attend in person, or perhaps they don't have to. So I think it's chunkable content. The other suggestion I might make is having a variety of content. So if you're thinking about, you know, STEM content, is it practice problems? Is it discussions about the content? Is it assessments or quizzes? And a variety of different content, whether you're in a synchronous or asynchronous. For our students, because we have adults, and in our institution has 27,000 students, so mainly adults, synchronous is tough. And so we're working with faculty to create, you know, engaging content, recording chats, recording lectures, using the poll features if folks are there, and those kinds of tools. And then to answer a question that I think is really important in the Q&A about digital divide, just taking a moment to do that. For institutions that had students coming to campus, maybe a blended format, digital divide wasn't popping up as much because students were using labs. And so I do think that this is an issue that institutions will have to grapple with, and administratively perhaps may have to provide laptops or technology for students who do not have it. We do have a lot of content that renders on mobile, and we find that students are using their phones or a tablet, but we know that that's not realistic for some STEM content. So one other tool we've looked at is using Amazon Workspace, putting the technology in the cloud for students so that they don't have to download. And then the last point I'll address is the adaptive platform that we've used is primarily is Realize It, which is where we put our own content in, but there's a lot of adaptive content out there in STEM, math, chemistry, biology, with a number of publishers that's quite good as well. So real mishmash of answers. Hopefully I covered some of the questions, but what I would summarize by saying is in total support what Ariel did, chunking and variety, and no lengthy 4-hour lectures, because the faculty did it anyway, and we didn't stop, but the students sure did vote and say, please don't ever do that to us again. And so I think too, you know, providing that guidance for faculty.
Yeah, and thank you for keeping an eye on those questions, Connie. Louise, do you want to hop in with some additional advice?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say definitely the variety of things that you provide to your students is really important, right? Students are finding, you know, and I think all of us have found, you know, fatigue over having constant webinars or watching constant videos. You can't just do the same thing for hours and hours and hours at a time. So it's really important to have that variety and to use tools that allow you to have that variety. So, you know, having some videos, having some text for students to read, having some interactive elements that they can work with, and having some visualizations, especially in STEM, are super important. And then, of course, being able to give them practice questions so that they can assess themselves as they're going along. All of those things help to both keep the students engaged, but also gives for a better learning environment.
Are there any sort of technical or platform affordances that support that particularly well? So either Louise or Ariel, are there things that, you know, whatever platform you're using is really essential to supporting both strong and equitable STEM instruction?
Yeah. Excuse me. This may sound that at the risk of sounding like I'm in a infomercial or something like that, but maybe this is safe. There is a platform called LibreText, and it's an open educational resources platform. So if you find or you have OER content, typically something that's called LaTeX, that's like a markup typesetting language very similar to HTML. So if you have the source code of a book in that form, source code, you could use this platform to make other versions of this book that are more dynamic and more interactive. And I mentioned this as an example as to the difference of having a static book, you know, something that is useful to have a hard copy and highlight and make annotations on your own. But if you can have another version of that content where the display looks like HTML, looks like a website, and you can display that in multiple devices and you can adjust the background color and the font size, and but in the middle, as you're reading, maybe you can have some of these interactive features of visual 3D visualizations, or some of these dynamic assessments. I think that those are tools that are meant to engage and to over shorter periods have attainable tasks, and they could also be used the other way in terms of collecting intelligence analytics as far as the shape of learning paths or learning patterns of individuals and cohorts of individuals. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about how we're moving the 21st century, how we're using artificial intelligence and adaptive tools, as to can we use these tools also to provide solutions that are customized for a person, and then they're also customizable for groups of people. Sometimes we struggle, and sometimes we bond with classmates because we find that we have very similar struggles. And so I recently learned and became an adopter of LibreTexts, and I'm pretty sure there are similar platforms there, that maybe are not open, but that they have those features about being dynamic, interactive, and collecting information from the user that could benefit the learner.
Yeah, so I hear you again suggesting using a platform that is, easily transferable to mobile, which helps with accessibility, and also being smart about how you use the data from these online platforms and using it to really enhance the student experience. Louise, do you want to hop on there too with any of sort of technical affordances that are really important in this moment?
Yeah, no, I think, like the Mobius platform, obviously, it has been designed specifically for STEM. And the reason that we say it's been designed for STEM is that it has a full math engine underneath it. Mm-hmm. So it can do things like test for mathematical equivalence. You can, it can actually extend the types of questions that you can ask your students to more open form questions. So you can say, give me an example of something where you need to do the mathematical checks to see if the student is right or not. And this, I know there was a question in the Q&A asking about, how do you handle cheating? And that's, of course, a huge thing when you move all online. So being able to ask students questions that are beyond just where they can Google the answer are super important. And the Mobius platform allows you to have a full text, your course notes, allows you to have interactives, videos, integrated questions, all together in sort of one platform so that the students can digest all of that information and know where they left off when they come back in. And then all that grade and all those analytics can be saved so that, as Ariel said, it's really important to be able to look at those analytics and see where everyone is, and to be able to then maybe make some shifts if you need to.
Yeah, I want to pick up a bit more on that assessments question, because I did see that someone put it in the Q&A, and I think that's a really great question. So Ariel or Connie, do you have advice for how to handle assessments in an online setting, particularly summative assessments? I believe Anna asked that question. Connie, do you have any?
I have experiences that are small scale.
Okay.
And Connie, I'm sure, can share with us something that's larger in volume. And
okay, so Ariel, why don't you give us a quick example of how you handle assessments?
Yeah, so my experience with asynchronous instruction has been, and also with blended learning, this is before COVID-19, so I always had a mixture of take-home assessments, like high-level assessments that were take-home, typically with some randomized question bank, adaptive-like or certainly smart technology. And then I had some other high-level assessments that were proctored. And they were kind of extreme in the sense that the proctor was old school. It was pencil and paper, no calculator. It was just the student, the pencil, and a piece of paper. And then the other extreme, which was take home, it was all technology allowed, you know, kind of open book and all that stuff. And I did that because I was trying to find kind of a balance. In a scenario where the testing center or testing centers, you know, like what we're living, experiencing right now, the proctoring, I find it, I have had to make compromises myself. You know, either I have not proctored my students, but my classes were very small size, and I could have done that with some video conference technology like this. Or the thing I did in my class in the spring was that I switched into a project-based learning mode, which is something similar as if you were writing a paper, and as a student you write a paper, submit a draft, and then the instructor gives you some revisions, and then you submit like that paper maybe 5 more times, and it's in that process there is a lot of editorial changes, you know. So I had the luxury that I had classes that I could do that because of the technical level and because of the size of the classes. But I know of some other colleagues of mine that they did had some proctoring with video conference technology, and then a mixture with some of those randomized question banks.
Connie, how about bigger picture or more bigger scale? How do you support assessment in online?
Well, and it's a great question, because in our model, we're using less objective tests and more application. It's in our mission as far as the kind of, you know, we're a career university. But I will tell you, our nursing program uses ProctorU and has assessments that way. Also, we're piloting question mark and looking at different tools. Our campus portal, and that campus was the one that moved to remote blended, has a testing feature. So I know that that's important for some content, but I will tell you that, and I'm going to change gears just a little bit about some of the ways that we've had success in some of these STEM courses without using testing. And we actually, and you've talked about it in the chat, I was reading a question about how do you connect with students. We have data that we found statistically significant that shows that relevance and engagement of faculty is what contributes to the success of student, particularly in STEM content. And you think about it, we have a lot of faculty who encourage, and that's great, but for STEM content, encouragement doesn't necessarily lead to success. So I'm going to repeat what I said initially, is that faculty who are working through problems and then having students work through problems in chat sessions or live sessions and demonstrate answers or showing concepts or computer programming are having more success than statistically significant success than faculty who do not. And so in CTU's model, we would ascribe to the importance of relevance, engagement, formative assessments, practice, 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 practice. When you need an exam to measure success, then that's very important. But we found that the going through the classroom actually is you know, equally important as opposed to testing. And I'll just grab 2 other questions. So that's the connecting with students at different levels, which is a great question too. So obviously students at the intro level do need that encouragement, and they need that you can do this. And we have a mobile app that allows us to see text messages of students as they're experiencing class. And what we can tell you is that phobia, math phobia, STEM phobia is real, where students are like, I can't do this. I knew I couldn't do this. And so I think at the intro level, we really talk with our faculty about being encouraging. At the upper level though, students don't, I mean, encouragement's fine, and I'm making generalizations here, but honestly what they want is content. And they're like, give me that content, show me how to use that content. And so we do differentiate our teaching methodology dependent upon the level, but, and I'll just say it again, engagement of faculty, we have found it to be statistically significant to the success of students in these STEM courses.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought in the differentiation question. I was eyeing it too, so that's great. Louise or Ariel, do you want to actually add to what Connie is saying about strategies for differentiation in an online learning setting?
Well, I did want to talk a little bit too about proctoring as well, right? I think In this time, you're going to find people, as you do, across the board, when you have any conversation about education, right? You have the full extremes. And as Ariel said, you can have sort of an open book exam, or you can move towards the proctoring. And I think really what you want to do is you want to have the students, give them the ability to show you that they understand the concepts that you needed them to understand. Whether that is you feel, okay, it needs to be proctored. There are lots of proctoring companies out there, but a lot of people have said, well, they're easy to get around, or they're maybe unjust for some students. So then one of our users, what they've done is they've actually used the traditional sort of assessment inside of Mobius, but they've also added essay questions and asked the students to explain, what was their thinking? What are ways to think about that? Or how could they apply this to something else? So they've asked the standard question for the student to answer, but then asked for some additional information that the student can type in, and then the instructors can go and look at those after. And the faculty that I talked to about this, they found they got a much better sense of the student's understanding of the topic by looking at their explanations. And so they could tell, did the student really capture, like, did they get it or not? And I think that that's super important when you move online. You don't have to necessarily always just be looking at the right answer, but you want to know, do they understand what they're working on as well?
Yeah, I would add an anecdote. And of course, I did this in a class that is called differential equations, which for engineers and physicists and mathematicians is kind of not upper level, but you need calculus 1, calculus 2 to be in differential equations. So it requires a little bit of technical maturity. And at one point, there is a topic that I don't really like, and I would happily have removed that topic given the conditions, that I was modifying the content of the class. But I still left that topic in there because I had some students that were engineering majors, and they really needed it. So normally you would, in an assessment, you would have a question, and most of how you gain or earn score is by providing an answer to the question. Here, I told them, okay, we're gonna do something different. Each of you is gonna come up with the answer first, okay? First you come up with the answer, then you come up with the question, and then you come up with the procedure. So it's answer, question, procedure. The three elements in a different order. And that kind of threw them off. But what I was doing was that everybody was basically creating a different version on the same type of question. And it was not so much about getting to an answer, because that was the first thing that they did. They first, came up with this function is going to be the answer to this, whatever. So this was about the procedure, the procedural steps that were applicable. Each student had a different, that's the idea of having randomized versions of the same questions. And so with that in mind, I didn't do it like that, but I could have even have them compare notes with each other, because they really had to each produce kind of that approach of essay type, where it's very personalized, how one person would voice, how their thinking process. So to me, even though that was a tedious topic, it made it more enjoyable. I also gave them a couple of opportunities to get some feedback before submitting the final version for grade. And some of them were kind of struggling there, and we could clarify that. And it wasn't, I didn't have the concern that they were copying, because everybody had a completely different version of this. So if they were going to copy from each other, they were going to copy the procedure and somehow the understanding of the logical steps. And to me, that was fair game. That's exactly what the learning process should be about.
Yeah, and I like that you and Louise are both talking about not only mastery, but sort of supporting critical thinking too. So I think those are some great practical strategies for how to do that in this scenario. I want to stick to the pragmatic. I have a very practical question in the Q&A, which is, how do you deliver labs online? I'm not sure who wants to tackle.
Yeah, I can tackle that one. We actually, and there was also a question about simulations in there too. And there are tools with labs and simulations out there. And we've used, in particular in computer science, a number of simulation tools. And what I can tell you is that I think usability is the most important feature to look at, because there's a lot of really slick tools out there, but then the students can't use them and the faculty can't use them, and you have to have so much bandwidth to install them. They can become problematic. And so we've used, in particular in computer science, a lot of different simulations of programming and some that lead to some certifications. But I will tell you that bandwidth is an issue. And so if you go down the lab route, and there's some online labs out there as well, again, a lot of publisher content that are really quite good. But my one caution would be, and I said the word earlier, I'll say it again, bandwidth. Because if the students can't use it because they don't have the bandwidth or the ability to get to a device that can support the tool, then that's problematic.
Yeah, and let's talk about faculty bandwidth for a minute too. You know, in your first response, you said none of this, regardless of tech tools, would work without the faculty, right? So I think there's sort of an interesting, like, philosophical question in the Q&A from our Aurora about, you know, faculty were in this position where they had to move online very quickly. They might not consider themselves to be great planners in this, like, abrupt shift, but how, now that we're in this scenario, do we really support their pedagogy and their teaching and their professional learning moving forward as we're using either online or these hybrid models? I know it's kind of that's a big question, but I think the simple version of that is really speaking to what you said early on, Connie, which is how do we really support the faculty to not only do this with fidelity, but to build on their own skills as educators?
You know, I can take a stab first. I just was in another meeting with another group related to quality matters, and institutions had a 27% increase in cost in supporting technology to faculty. So I think that certainly the institution has to support faculty. Now, in times of tough budgets, that's really, really difficult at times. And so I would say that adjusting the technology to make sure everybody can use it. And so, you know, in some cases, we might be able to provide an Amazon a cloud account for a faculty member with the technology there. In others, though, we do say we do have minimum requirements for faculty to teach with laptops. So I don't think there's one answer, but what I can tell you is that with COVID-19, that institutions, I'm betting, will need to allocate additional dollars to support faculty with laptops or other kinds of technology as students, you know, are slowly returning to campus, maybe in the fall. Some are, some aren't. I think the online work will continue to grow. And if an institution isn't supporting faculty with technology as well, that's going to be tough.
Ariel or Luis, do you want to, I see you both kind of, the wheels are turning. So.
Yeah, so I would say I have a comment in terms of, and this is a comment in terms of the digital readiness. Okay, so, and that's, and this is a comment, and I have a cheat sheet because I was looking, I was very intrigued for this, so I looked it up, and the one of these think tanks, the Pew Research Center, had a study in 2016, and they came up with a measurement of that in the American adult in the United States, only 17% of adults are considered digitally ready. So it's less than 20% of the adult population. Here, adult meaning mature adult, like older than 30, like the young adults, the traditional student population. I don't think that's represented here in these measurements here, but that's as a nation, you know, this is I would say is a kind of a small percentage, small fraction of people that to be considered digitally ready is because there is a level of competence and also confidence in using the interweb, as they call it, in finding information that not only you find what you need, but you also are confident that this is a good source. So this information is reliable. So having that little bit of power of making discern, you know, what is a trusted source versus another one that's questionable. So less than a fifth, less than 20%. And so there is a larger size in the group that's considered reluctant. That's like 33%. And then the unprepared is like 14%, you know, and reluctant is the group that definitely is going to be not really prone to doing anything. They're in the comfort zone, and that's how they know, you know, business as usual, there is no need to change. So, you know, as maybe some faculty I mentioned at the beginning, that I still like to improvise. And some of us maybe rely more on the improvisation or spontaneity, also because we were good at, and we could really respond well to dealing with situations, maybe not with a script, but rather like seeing how it would unfold, you know. But this is definitely a time in our history where I think now, as STEM professionals, as STEM educators, we're going to have to also make sure that the students that we are training, that we are providing them with a set of skills, they're also working away. Hopefully, we're going to make this 70% be 50 or 80% of the population to be digitally ready, so that some of these digital tools become just like driving using a microwave or using a cell phone, you know. It is also remarkable how there is a divide in terms of that digital, in terms of urban versus rural populations, the access to the internet and access to devices. And there is a divide by socio-economical status, you know, basically the families that have more income, they have more means, and they have more access. So one thing that personally worries me in the spring of 2020 is college readiness. You know, how some of these standardized tests, which many schools are already, you know, eliminating as a selection criteria, but this threw off the schedule, cancellations and rescheduling for ACT and SAT. And I think that we're gonna see traditional students trying to go to college, and they were not able to complete their advanced placement or one of these other exams, you know, and we're going to need more efficient means of leveling these students, you know, so that they achieve that being at grade level, at the college readiness level.
Louise, do you want to add anything to that? I think you bring up a great point about equity across the board, Ariel, so we might want to dive into that a bit next. But Louise, I want to give you a chance to speak to
that. No, I think, you know, when it comes to faculty, I think it's super important. You know, Connie has talked about the administration supporting the faculty, and that is absolutely key, but you also need the faculty to support each other, right? I think at a time like this, you really need the faculty to work together to sort of, you know, not only in terms of putting content together, but agreeing on how are we going to assess the students, and working together to come up with a good platform for their students, right? Because every school is a little bit different, the population of students is a little bit different, and so it's really key, I think, for people to group together and to really talk to each other.
Yeah, good point about sort of faculty collaboration, whether that's formal or informal, right?
Leanna, do you mind if I address a question that came up twice, I think, in the chat, but it's relevant to the faculty piece as well?
Sure.
There was a point made about, you know, the faculty that are used to sort of walking in the classroom with the textbook, and they have a few planned activities, and, you know, perhaps we've done this as campus faculty more than online. And the question is, you know, you have to do more planning for online. And I would say yes. Yes, 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 yes. Because what we found is that in transitioning campus faculty who just knew what to do in the classroom, I have my book, I've got my exercises, I do group activities here, I do all of this here. When we put them into the online environment, all they knew what to do was how to be on a Zoom and talk. And that is not an engaging strategy. And even in the discussion boards, when we said, well, you know, we want you to have some discussion boards to engage, because these are faculty never taught online. STEM, engineering I'm talking about right now specifically. So this is all engineering faculty. They really didn't know how to do it. And they not only didn't know how to engage in the discussion board, they just didn't really know what to say. And so we had to help them plan as to how to engage. So I completely agree with whoever wrote the question twice now about you have to plan ahead. And then there was one other question relative to faculty with rubrics and discussion boards, or rubrics and gradings. We do use rubrics because that helps the planning process. And it helps students understand in assignments what they need to cover. It helps faculty in grading know how they need to grade. And so in our institution, we're very supportive of rubrics, not to handcuff faculty, but to give some guidelines to students and to faculty. And I think the planning and you know, design, instructional design and planning and helping faculty can help to bridge some of those divides that you're talking about as well. I think winging it in an online class, maybe some of you have seen some effect of winging it in online classes, but I've not. And so I do think that taking a lot of those details into consideration is important.
I would add that I think for when we learn to be online instructors, a very important part of being an online instructor is to be an online student, you know, and it's exactly, I don't think it's the type of testing we go through when we are making ourselves to be face-to-face instructors. Oh yeah, I was a student once, that was 10 or 20 years ago. But when we are using these technologies, I would say that having that ability to learn with some distance mode, whether it's Coursera or EDX or something, like logging in there and then, you know, kind of parsing through, it really makes you as an instructor to be in that seat where the students are usually. So, you know, Connie was mentioning plan ahead and plan very well. Practice is something that she mentioned earlier in another context, but if you're doing the plan of the lessons with some of these active learning or lab activities, the collaboration is that one instructor, you know, a group of instructors are setting up this plan, they come up with a lab activity, and then there are 3 or 4 instructors, they can have one practice session pretending they're all students, you know, and it doesn't have to last an hour, it can last 10 minutes. And because they're students and instructors, they can actually go through this much faster and they can identify vulnerabilities and they can identify areas that can be improved very quickly. And that kind of is like a drill. It's like a fire drill. You know, everyone has to get out of the building at some point. So these type of collaboration practice really helps the entire process. And it, in a way, is like hand-holding for the less experienced instructors, you know, but they start finding that they can also do this themselves. You know, it's just another venue, you know, or another mode.
Yeah, love that suggestion to put yourself in the student's shoes and actually do practice classes, testing, etc. I think that's a great suggestion. Louise, I saw you about to pop in there. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I definitely think that, you know, planning is absolutely important. I think as well, you know, a lot of people when it was first, okay, we have to move everything online, people were, oh, well, I have a whole bunch of videos that I'll just put up online. And you know, as Connie has already said, like, that's not the best thing, right? Like, I mean, it's definitely something, it's a piece of the online puzzle, but I think with online, there are so many other activities that you need to incorporate so that the students can actually get the full benefit of the teaching. And so I think it's just important to realize that once you get online, you can make incremental improvements to your course time after time, so that it is a nice model of being able to get better, you know, incorporate suggestions that you get either from other faculty or from students, and just improve the whole quality over time.
I want to be mindful of time. All really great suggestions, I think, and very actionable. So thank you for those. We're moving toward the fall. A lot of universities have not announced plans for the fall yet, but many have announced hybrid learning options, or options where there's some in-person instruction, but then there's always an online option. So Connie, I'm hoping that you can actually talk about how institutions can be preparing for this scenario, and then also talking about the faculty and student side who are going to be trying to feel this out as well.
This is a big topic right now in higher ed, is that we know that the transition in spring was, there was that connection with faculty sometimes in the classroom. We moved remotely and we finished up, but how do we prepare? I think that I would say incremental would be a word that I would use. And what I mean by that is that when you're moving faculty to online and they're not used to it, they don't like it, they don't want to do it necessarily, incremental is okay. And I'll give you an example of that. When we moved engineering courses, we have two very, very experienced engineering faculty, and they really wanted to just work out problems on their pad of paper. So for those that have worked in online for years like me, that is but we thought, okay, how can we help the faculty? So we purchased cameras that looked at the pad of paper and allowed that faculty, that class, to transition in that way. Now we're trying to get them up to the next step in using digital tools, but that's not where they are. And so I would say that while us in online learning, know that there are tools out there, meeting your faculty where they are to incrementally get them there will be a much more positive experience for students and faculty. The other point that I will make is that, and I've heard this, that the teaching and learning centers, if you have any teaching and learning center folks on the webinar, you all are invaluable for providing support as well as instructional designers. So sort of wrapping our arms around as opposed to getting frustrated. And then also, I read a chat comment about paying attention to feedback, student survey feedback. I look at that student survey feedback from the last semester and see what we can incorporate, but incremental, I think, is okay in the fall. I just don't think we can go from here to there, without creating a lot of frustration for folks.
That's great advice. And Louise, do you want to add to that, especially on the practitioner side?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, for the fall, I think there's going to be the additional struggle that a lot of campuses are choosing to, there will be some face-to-face, but they also have to provide it asynchronously for students who may not be able to make it back to campus. And so now, you're now faced with, we have to provide both modes, and being able to support both modes, I think, is going to be an additional struggle.
It could be if, I think this is a time where we should review more carefully our adopted textbooks and access codes. I am an advocate of open educational resources, so I'm kind of always preaching about OERs and stuff like that, but I'm also aware that it's not all about OERs. There are other materials that are not open, but they're quite effective and useful. So automation, I think it's something to be, if you have two classes, one where it's synchronous and there is some face-to-face, and then you have another section that's asynchronous, these are two different things, so it may be okay to go over the same content with some access code where there already are videos and some other materials there for the asynchronous class. And then you're kind of being, doing whatever other thing with your class you're meeting at, the meeting times, So I think it's exploiting the automated tools. It's appropriate, especially when you're trying to, some of us are facing increased workloads. Precisely, in some cases you have an optimization problem. You have 30 students, have to divide them into 3 sections of 10 so that you can keep social distancing, and there you are, and now you have an extended schedule, something like that, you know. And then in addition, you may have a couple of online sections. So I think that sometimes there is a little, some folks are skeptical about the access codes. I think there may be a conception about replacing the human instruction, you know, with correspondence or talking to the student by email only or something like that, or automatic pilot. And that's not exactly what some of these distance learning delivery are about. But I think automation would be very useful. And I would say one last thing, that GitHub Classroom, and there are tools similar to GitHub. I think there's something that developers use that's called Slack. But GitHub Classroom is something I have become aware recently, that it's the type of tool that sometimes can be integrated in a learning management system. Microsoft Teams is another suite of tools for collaboration too. And I think going into the fall semester, we also have to keep in mind how to optimize and better use some of these tools within an instruction setting to make to maybe spark that engagement and that collaboration among the students, and to make our work a little more manageable, you know, and provide meaningful feedback. I think for me, that's one of the things I've learned also, to how to always keep the students, providing them high quality feedback to the level that is really resonating with them. It really, they go and make changes, and then come back, and then they continue. If they start seeing progress, then they engage.
Yeah, good strategies there to really lean on the resources that are available to you, sort of ready to go courseware materials, but also, you know, use those collaboration and communication tools effectively as well, like Slack or GitHub Classroom, or, you know, Connie mentioned Amazon Cloud or Microsoft Teams. There's a lot out there. So just kind of practice with what you've got, and use those ready-made materials as well.
And Leanne, I'll just mention, I know we're almost out of time, but one quick example that might, you know, we had to work with our nursing faculty to be flexible because, you know, again, generalizations, nurses are very linear. And so we actually sent kits out to students to suture because we had that requirement. And the faculty member was on Zoom with the student watching the suturing. It was all recorded. The student, you know, they weren't suturing their arms, they were suturing, you know, something, and because I'm not a medical person, but it was a back and forth example of a student learning to suture. And I listened to some of the video, and the students were going, oh yeah, okay, I get it. Because the faculty member was saying, no, now you got to close this. And so you never would have thought that suturing could be taught virtually. But I'm here to tell you, using Zoom and kits, because somebody asked about kits in the questions, you know, with the creativity of the nursing faculty, they figured out how to do it.
That's an amazing example. Online suturing. when in doubt, you know, you can remember that anecdote and think about if online suturing can happen, then you can do it too. So I know we're almost out of time. We have 1 minute left. We're going to go just a couple minutes over. What I want to do is do a quick go round to all of you, and just give you one last opportunity to either say what you wish you had known before this move to online learning during COVID-19, or just offer one last piece of advice or encouragement for folks who are teaching STEM courses online or hybrid. Louise, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah, I think what I would say is, you know, there's obviously no time like the present. We have to do this now. And I think that there are a lot of technologies and tools out there that can be used that can help with it. So I just encourage people to, you know, to investigate what tools are out there to really help with creating an effective online class for your students.
Ariel.
I would say it is very humbling, you know, and the idea of when you are an online instructor, you should also be an online student, you know, and then learn how to transition back and forward. I would remind everybody there is something called Amazon Web Services, AWS, and they have AWS Academy and AWS Educate. One of those, and if you're a professor, you can get easy access to, they have repositories of guidelines of how to teach online, you know, because they have to do some distance education. So I would encourage people to look at some of the tutorials they may have, and if you could replicate some of that, you know, that it's either AWS Educate or AWS Academy. And LibreText would be the other thing I would say for everybody to go and check, libretext.org, and they may even find a version of a book that is in their subject.
Nice. Connie.
I would say that anxiety is real for those who haven't taught online and those who haven't taken courses online. And so to remember that, and also heard it earlier, taking the course as a student, experiencing the tool as a student can make such a huge difference. It did with our faculty.
Great. This has been, I mean, the time has flown by today. There were just so many great tidbits and advice, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Ariel, Connie, and Louise, we've learned lots from you. Thank you for your participation. I want to let you know that we will send you the recording of this webinar within the next week, along with some resources. So be keeping an eye out for those. We're also happy to hear from you if you have topics that you want us to talk about in this webinar series. Please let us know. We always appreciate your feedback. And we want to give a special thank you to our sponsor, Digital Ed, for this webinar. Digital Ed, just as a reminder, provides a complete suite of tools to support and enhance education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So if you want to learn more information about Digital Ed, you can visit digitaled, that's all one word, .com. Again, I'm Leanna Gamber-Thompson, Digital Project and Operations Manager here at EdSurge. We encourage you to sign up for our free newsletters at edsurge.com, and you can check out more of our webinars at edsurge.com/e/webinars. Thank you all for your great questions and your great feedback. We'll see you next time. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.